points, and then the idea is that we open it up to the floor, so you guys can ask whatever you like, basically, whatever's on your mind, whatever's giving you the biggest issues at the moment that you think Bruce can answer, or some of us could answer, even if it's not in Bruce's key area of expertise, although I'm pretty sure he could pretty much handle most questions there. And if we run out of time tonight, Jess, I think we said an hour, did we, for this?
Yeah, just an hour.
Yep. So what we did last time is we got a few questions at the end with Shane, and we collected those questions, and we got him to answer those. And so they are going to go into this next newsletter that's coming out Friday from us. So keep an eye out for the newsletter. Anything that doesn't get answered tonight, anything from the last session is going in tonight. And Bruce, if it's all right with you, if we have leftover questions, we might just jot down some points to put in, not tomorrow's this week's newsletter, but maybe the one after that, just to try and get all the questions answered if we've got any left over, if that's okay. We'll pick your brain on them.
I'm confident we'll get through all the questions. I haven't got to say too much tonight.
Well, look, we don't want to interrupt people's evening for too long, I guess.
Can you see my screen there?
Yeah, we can. We can see the PowerPoint, not the slideshow, if you know what I mean, Bruce.
So try that again then.
Yep.
And that better?
Yeah, that's great. So look, the other thing is we actually recorded, we forgot for the very first part, but we actually recorded last Crappy Seasons conversations with Shane, and we've found that we had almost double the number of views of that recording than we actually got on the night, so people could watch it whenever they wanted. So if it's okay with everyone, we might record again just to make sure that if anyone really wanted to be here and couldn't, that they've got access to this as well. And it'll go in, so it'll go out to members in the newsletter. So, people online tonight and in the newsletter. So if you're uncomfortable with that, there's a chat option up the top there. Just let us know, and we can see if we can do some fancy editing if you don't want to be involved or included in that part or something like that. But hopefully everyone's pretty used to this by now, and you're happy for this to go up as a recording for people who couldn't make it tonight to have a listen to. Yeah, any questions on that about how it's going to happen? So, Bruce, I don't know how you wanted to start, but the chat's
so
there.
I've just got a couple of I've just got a couple of slides, so I might just run over those slides. I know a few people on this, and most people know all the basic stuff, so I don't want to waste people's time with that, but I'll just run over a couple of things that I think are worthwhile highlighting, and then we'll open the floor for questions. I'll only be 5 minutes or 10 minutes at the most, I reckon.
Yep, righto. Before we get going then, Bruce, just to make sure everyone's comfortable with chat and they can find the button, how about we just do a little thing where we say everyone just stick how much rain they got over the weekend in the chat, just so that we know that everyone can access it and know how to find it and read it and all the rest of it. And look, you can tonight, if you want to, you can stick, ask your questions directly or stick them in the chat, and Jess or I will ask Bruce for you, whatever you're more comfortable doing. But there's no silly questions tonight. Everyone's not loving the weather conditions at the moment, and have there's trade-offs in every direction, it seems, at the moment with whatever decision you make. So, you know, to hear people's experiences and what their, you know, what their biggest challenges are and how they're planning on tackling it, or it might just help others to gather ideas on how they might tackle the challenges they've got ahead. So this is great. We've got 10 mils at Tumba, 12 mils at Henty. We've got a few more coming through. Andy's coming in as well. That's great. Yeah, so while this happens, Bruce, I guess if you want, you're welcome to kick off and
yeah.
And we'll hopefully get some questions as we go that we can bring to your attention, or people just jump off mute and ask away.
Yep. Thanks, Alison. Just by way of background, for those who don't know me, my name's Bruce Allworth, and I run a sheep and beef farm east of Holbrook. At the moment, we've got about 2,000 ewes that started lambing last Friday that we're feeding, and we've got about 3,500 ewes that are due to lamb in 5 weeks' time, which we're also feeding, plus weaners and wethers, which we're also feeding. So most of this is just what I'm thinking about at the moment, and just a couple of points. I'm thinking that most people are on the point of lambing at this stage, so I'll talk mostly about that, but I'm happy to answer questions on any area. So I've just got a couple of, if I can get my slides. Why aren't we progressing on this one? There we go, rightio. I guess the key points are, well, the main thing we need to think about when we're feeding in the conditions we've got up to lambing is all about energy. And it's really important. Late pregnant ewes have a decreased appetite, particularly twin and triplet bearing ewes, because the uterus takes up more of the room in the abdomen, and as a result, their appetite goes down, their requirements are going up rapidly in the last 6 weeks, and energy is really important. The difficulty is, as we move into lambing, that the typical high energy diet that a lot of people will be feeding will either be wheat or triticale, and they're both very low in fibre, and that does not augur well for milking. So when we come up to, once you're into lambing, you've really got to get some fibre into the diet plus energy. So that's not necessarily hay, because hay's low in energy. Hay is good in fibre and will help with milking, but you've got to watch your energy levels. So we're looking at things like changing over to barley if you can get it. I'm going to try some corn. I know Nick is feeding corn out there and seems to be going well. And I can get hold of corn. I can't get hold of barley easily. By far the best feed is lupins, but at this time of year, we don't actually need the protein, and you pay a lot for that. So that's a couple of the considerations there. For those who are already got lambs on the ground, in these sort of seasons, you've really got to keep an eye on the ewes and assess how well they're milking and think about weaning. As a rule, if the ewes start gaining any weight, it's time to get the lambs off, because I'll guarantee you, ewes won't gain weight while they're milking properly. If ewes are milking properly, they will be maintaining their weight or losing weight. The only way they can gain weight is to stop milking. So if you start to think your ewes are picking up and you're thinking, gee, I'm doing a good job with the feeding, be careful. It might be showing up in the lambs, might be starting to not grow nearly as well. And the other thing to keep in mind is that the weight that you get the ewes when you wean them is a really big determinant for how many lambs you'll get next year. So if you let those ewes fall too far, leaving the lambs on them while they're trying to milk and they're not able to put weight on, it might help the lambs slightly this year, but it's going to lead to a lot lower lambing next year. So really what the focus needs to be for most of us at the moment is thinking about how the ewes are performing, how they're milking, and whether or not when we're going to need to wean. You cannot wean lambs at 6 weeks of age successfully. They will mostly die. You can start to wean lambs about 8 weeks of age, but of course it depends on how long you've joined as to when the vast majority of lambs will be over 6 to 8 weeks of age. And we can talk about that. I thought I should just throw up some figures because I know Jed would have a go at me if I didn't have any figures up there. So these are all for you, Jed. Look, these are these are just pinched off the internet, and really the the feed value of feed is mostly around its metabolizable energy. Protein has a little bit, but if you've got short green feed, they will be getting a bit of protein. It's completely different to when you're feeding normally in late summer and autumn when there's no green feed. So protein's going to be less of an issue, but is still important. But the other thing that becomes important for milk production is fibre. And I've just circled the difference between wheat around 3%, triticale around that 3 to 4%, and then barley gets up to around 8%. Once you're getting up to that 8%, you're starting to get much better milk production from the ewes. And obviously, there's, to my knowledge, there's bugger around. But oats has always been a really good feed for lambing ewes because of the higher fibre. Usually, higher fibre feeds generally go down in energy, which is why barley is reasonably good because it usually keeps the energy up, and why lupins are staggeringly good. If you look at the energy level and the acid detergent fibre, the fibre levels of lupins, they're just fantastic. And obviously the protein is good, not only because it's high in protein, because it's bypass protein, but my lupin suppliers are holding on to their lupins, so they're quite hard to get. So it would be all very well for me to say go and feed lupins, but they're pretty pricey and they're hard to get. So it's just really a matter of trying to find out whatever you're feeding, have a look at the tables and see what it's suited. Just a reminder, and you probably don't need any reminding, but why we feed ewes pre-lambing is to keep the ewes alive so they don't get preg tox, but also to try and get the birth weight up for the lambs, which is why it's always advantageous if you're feeding sheep to separate off twin-bearing and single-bearing ewes and make sure you're getting extra feed into the twin-bearing ewes, because you've really got to get that birth weight up to keep the survival going. Depending on breed, but most twins will struggle to be 4 kilos. Most will be 3.5 to 4, whereas singles will be 4.5 to 5 and have much better survival. I put in the middle graph there that says ewe conditioner joining, just to make you remember that when you wean sheep in late spring, mid-spring, late spring, early summer, that's going to have a big determinant on what their weight is going into their joining, and the weight at next joining is going to determine subsequent fertility. And just a reminder that our protein level goes up, drifts up slightly late pregnancy, but goes up even higher in lactation. But importantly, this factor is the energy factor, and the factor goes up enormously. So while we're only feeding around 70% extra, around 2 kilograms extra for a late pregnant ewe, once they get into lambing, if you want to keep them milking and they're only in marginal condition, you're needing to do about 2.5 times what you're normally feeding. And if the pasture was maintaining a dry sheep, that would be about 4 kilograms of grain per head per week. So it's just a reminder that these levels go up. Happy to answer any questions on those. Just grabbed another table off the internet. There's plenty of tables around. They all show the same thing. This one's just a reminder that while I've said hay's good to lambing ewes because of the fibre, the hay does go down. Fortunately, once a ewe is lambed, her appetite does go up, but you've got to be really careful if you've got ewes that are late pregnant. Trying to eat hay is a disaster because they can't physically eat enough to get their energy requirements on ad lib hay because the energy density isn't high enough for them and they're limited by their intake. So I've just put that up as a bit of a warning. Alison also suggests I talk about animal health issues, but I'd probably rather you ask me questions. Hypocalcemia is staring us in the face at the moment. If you've been feeding a lot of grain without adding limestone, then you are at risk with hypocalcemia with the ewes. So you should, if you're feeding cereals, you should be sticking in 1 to 1.5% of limestone. It's a bugger to put in. I've been putting it in as I auger it out of the truck going into the silo. And then it's pretty dusty, in inverted commas, a white dust coming out of the silo. I don't know what the best system is, but most people can work it out. Preg tox is an obvious one. Once you've got the lambs out of the ewe, that's no longer a problem, whereas hypocalcemia will be a problem for a little while. Surprisingly, I haven't heard, but this season should have been a shocker for Campylobacter, because if we're trail feeding and you're feeding in roughly the same spot in the paddock every day, that's when we usually see outbreaks of Campylobacter, now, which is abortions. Now, I haven't heard much of that, and I'm thinking it's because we've actually been really dry as well. But this sort of rain this week, if you've still got ewes, as I have, coming up with still 4 weeks to lambing and you're still feeding them, then just be very careful if you're feeding in the same spot on the ground. That is a recipe for getting Campylobacter, just because of the contamination that occurs where they're trying to eat off the ground. So try and feed in different spots as much as you can. I know that's easier said than done. So I've got a lamb there that's aborted from Campylobacter. I've got a ewe over here with Preg tox. She was a ewe with a foot abscess in a very good year. So ignore that pasture. That was taken a few years ago. I've got a lamb over. Oh, I've got a lamb over on this right side, which we don't see very often, but it is a consequence of feeding. We've had a couple of cases this year. Some people do see it. This is in a lamb. I've just pinched the fat off the internet, but this is a condition called polyoencephalomalacia, or PEM. And the only reason I mention that is it responds brilliantly to treatment. I've actually got a picture of that lamb as a 4-year-old ewe, and I would have given that up for dead having seen it, but it responded, and they respond very well to vitamin B1. So if you're having those sort of troubles, they get the typical stargazing, they get neurological signs, and then they start looking up at the sky. And if you give them a shot of B1, probably about 8 or 9 mils of B1, just into the muscle, or we give it IV, but into the muscle, 3 or 4 hours they'll have stabilised, and most of them will recover reasonably quickly. If they're too far gone, they actually don't get worse when you give them the injection, they just don't recover. So there's a whole heap of other things. Worms, I've put worms in there because one of the issues will be potentially worms in the lambs. So again, I'm really plugging this point, but the lambs, the ewes, whatever we say, the ewes aren't going to milk as well as they normally do. That's a given. We've got to be feeding them less than we've given access to for the last 3 or 4 years with our good covers that we've had while we've been lambing. So the ewes aren't going to be milking as well, which means the lambs are going to start eating earlier. The lambs are going to be grazing on very short pasture, and they will be picking up any worms that are there. So 9 or 10 weeks of age, I'm not talking about 2 or 3 weeks of age. I'm not talking about lamb marking. I'm talking about 9 to 10 weeks of age. You need to be keeping an eye on those lambs, and that's one of the reasons why you might have to get the lambs off the lambing paddocks and give them a drench. And that, good timing, Phil, you don't have to listen to me. Now you can ask questions. That is all I have, but I'm happy to answer any questions. I'll stop sharing that. So that might have just twigged a few pointers, or people might be totally uninterested with that and have their other questions. Over to you, Alison.
My head's spinning. There was a lot in there. Who wants to start? Does anyone online want to jump in and ask Bruce a question?
You can ask questions, or you can correct me with your experience. I'm happy with that. I'm not all knowledgeable. I'm just firing out the things I'm aware of, but I know some of you have a lot more knowledge than me.
Yep. So Rowan's asked the question, what do we need to be aware of with feeding corn? We're about to start feeding lambing ewes with corn.
Yeah. So I rang Phil Locke 2 days ago when I ordered my 60 tonne of corn, said, what have I got to look out? Because I have never fed corn. Phil was a bit worried that he'd fed it pre-lambing and possibly increased the milk production, maybe had a couple of extra cases of mastitis. My my feeling is that mastitis might have been just due to the fact that ewes have been on dirty ground for a bit longer than normal, not on the clean grass, but on the dirt, particularly around the camps where we've been feeding them, rather than the corn as such. But the only thing you've got to be aware of with any changes of feed is not introducing grains, but changing between grains or even batches of grains, is you generally take 3 to 4 feeds to change over. So if you're like me and you've been feeding wheat, the corn's coming tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock, hopefully. I'm going to go out, I'm going to mix that with 2/3 wheat, 1/3 corn for my first feed, 50-50 for my second feed, 2/3 from a third feed, and then I'm going to be on to corn for the fourth feed. So it takes about a week to get over onto the corn. I'm a week into lambing, so most of the ewes are still late pregnant, so feeding wheat's as good as anything. So that's why I'm changing over now.
And how does corn go in terms of energy and fibre, as in comparison to wheat and barley?
So corn rates at about 12 on the energy. It rates at about 9 on the fibre, so it's not nearly like lupins, but it's out of that below 4 category that wheat and triticale are in. And my experience is that barley's pretty good, and barley only rates at about 6 or 7, and you get much better milk production out of barley. So my feeling is that corn's good. There's a guy, Dave Woofenden, who some of you'll know out at Rand, who has these multiple bearing ewes, triplets and quads, lots of them through his genetics. He's fed a lot of corn over the years and says the milk production's best on corn. So I'm reasonably confident that we won't have too many problems, but I have no experience.
And Andy, at a blink of the eye, has now provided us with a corn feed test. So if you're looking in the chat, there's a little chart there that's showing, I think it's pretty much reporting what you're saying anyway.
It's got the that looks
higher ME.
Where's the
second from the bottom?
ME 14 for ME. Says less than 4, but on the neutral detergent fibre 11. I wouldn't be concerned about that acid detergent fibre. I think it's going to test higher than that. The ones I've seen, I had trouble finding this info, but I found ones that were consistently around 7 to 9 in that acid detergent fibre.
Okay.
But the main thing is, I mean, and you worry when people produce, I don't know where this comes from, Andy, but 14's a very high ME, and you rarely see that. If that's done by NRI, that is not the same as actually what goes through a sheep. So when you get feed tests done by NRI, they will generally test better on things like energy than you'll actually get with sheep. And on the New South Wales DPI site, actually, they produce an interesting graph. They have the ME for sheep and the ME for cattle for similar feeds, and they're completely different. But the NIR is exactly the same for those feeds because that's how it's done. So, yeah, I'd be pretty confident that it'll be all right. And I don't want Andy to buy corn because we share an auger and I'm using it tomorrow. So keep away from the auger tomorrow, Andy.
Silos full, Bruce.
Say again for me, Phil.
We're in a different situation. I've got some ewes that we weaned a month ago, and I'm juggling with paddocks, and we haven't had this situation before where we've been with feed. So I've got a call, and I built some drought lot paddocks 5 or 6 years ago, which we've never had to use, and I've got lambs and weaned ewes competing for the feed. So my thought is to put the ewes into the drought lighting, but we haven't done that before. And this just came up when we were thinking about it today. So I thought, what's the best way to feed the ewes that have been weaned? The lambs were weaned off them about a month in a drought lot over the next probably month or 6 weeks till we get some growth in the paddocks.
Yeah. So you've been feeding the ewes now, or they haven't been fed?
Yeah, no, we've been feeding lucerne hay to them.
Yeah, so I mean, there's no problem putting them in a drought lot, and they'll need about 3 kilograms per head per week to keep their condition on them, which is probably all you need to do, because presumably, and Alison will back me up on this completely and guarantee it for everyone. That's a job. Presumably, we've got a spring coming, Alison. Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely. We're definitely.
Thank you. And who's going to win the Melbourne Cup while you're at it?
Yeah. No, I can't help you with that one.
Okay, so I mean, presumably you're hoping just to have it in for 4 to 6 weeks, then get them out on the paddock. So
Exactly
you're not
right.
needing to whack the weight on these ewes. You're just needing to keep them going along.
That's
3 kilograms per head per week will keep sheep going nicely, straight wheat. And you probably, at this stage, you probably don't even need to have limestone if they're not milking. That would be pretty straightforward. Presumably your drought lot's set up to feed them. How you feed them in troughs?
No, we haven't. We're not that far set up. So we've got the yard set up. We've got water around the place, and my thought was more around the lucerne hay. So you're suggesting to put some grain in as well?
Well, look, depends how much. If you've got lucerne hay on hand, lucerne hay is fine for dry sheep. It all comes back to cents per the cost, what it's worth to you, or what you've got to buy feed for on a cents per megajoule of energy.
I've got hay sheds full of lucerne. So
yeah. Well, lucerne hay, that's dead easy.
Yep. And what else would I just normally mix up a lime, salt, and cause mag sort of mixture that I'm giving them. Would we continue to do that in the drought lot?
Look, that's a good question. If they were on lucerne, yes, but on lucerne hay, they shouldn't need it. The hay process actually helps them get a lot of those minerals, whereas actually eating straight pasture. So I don't think you would need any mineral mix at this stage. And given that we've come out of a slightly greenish time and we're going to go into a greenish time, there's no other things that you need to add in.
Okay, excellent. Hey, thank you very much. That's been really helpful.
No problems.
So
I wish I had a shed of lucerne hay and I'd wean my ewes at this point, but anyway.
Oh,
I shouldn't be envious. Not allowed to be.
So Andy's also asked Bruce what time of day to feed the corn. What you got any thoughts on that, given this there'll be lambing?
No, and in all the years I've never had to feed ewes at Talubi lambing. So this new one for me. I actually did a trial. MLA have been trying to get us to do a trial for years comparing feeding lambing ewes versus self-feeders. And I did it with a group of sheep just to help MLA a few years ago, so that I have fed lambing ewes before. I look, time of day, I don't want to say too much on time of day, because feeding is more important than time of day. And if I tell you they need to be fed at 9 o'clock in the morning and it's pouring with rain, then they're better being fed in the afternoon when it's not raining than in the morning. But as a general rule, you've got to imagine that it's better to smother them during daylight than it is right on the point of darkness. So I tend to do all our feeding in the morning. But tomorrow afternoon, I've been at CSU today. Simon's away. I'm going to feed sheep tomorrow afternoon. But I'll probably feed them, before 3 o'clock in the afternoon. But my experience is, depending on your paddock size, so long as you're not introducing feed for the first time, if those sheep have been fed for at least 4 to 6 weeks, most ewes will, the day they lamb, will stay off the feed and stay with their lamb, and then come in afterwards. And it gets pretty chaotic, but there's not as much mismothering as you would expect. I mean, I think you get more mismothering in ewes when you're not feeding and you're just driving around in the paddock than you do going in when they're used to getting fed and they know what's going on. But you have to judge that for each. I mean, all sheep are different and depending how you've managed them. Anyone else got any comment? I can see a few people here have been doing plenty of this for the last 3 or 4 weeks. Anyone got any comments?
No, I think the biggest thing is to not let them get hungry, so they don't chase you. I think is the main one we've experienced. So just every second day, we're lambing on grass, but every second day, just sort of poke in quietly, put a big heap, we'll put a big trail somewhere, and particularly with corn, they'll pick it up over two or 3 days. So
yeah. Thanks, Gus. And that's just touched on a really important point. I'm often asked, well, I think it's an important point. It might be pretty boring. I'm often asked whether we should be feeding every day or every second day or every third day. And I've just got to remind you of the awful scenes you see on the TV with the UN trucks going in and trying to give out rice. And you've just got to watch that we're still not feeding. Once you get up to really high feeding levels, your frequency can increase. But you have got to be careful that you're not just giving the quick eaters all the feed and getting a tail. And there was some really good work done back in the 50s, which showed once a week feeding, you got much higher survival rates than daily feeding in drought feeding. But that was down at the drought feeding levels. When you're feeding lamb and ewes, if you're up 4 kilograms per head per week, you're going to be getting a decent amount of feed. As Angus said, if you're going every second day, they're going to have some left over and some there to go. But just be careful, particularly with things like weaner sheep, that if you increase your frequency, you can actually make things worse. So every second or third day is actually better than daily, despite what that ad says on the TV.
Very good. So, Jess, we had a couple of extra questions come in early. You've got one of them there. What are the best value proteins for feed rations in the current market? I don't quite know the context for that. Was this for trying to grow lambs, or was this for ewes lambing? Do you have any context around that question?
So this one, I believe, was Kelly's question, and I think Kelly's on the call. She might be able to elaborate a bit more on that. I think she just meant generally for lambing ewes, but please correct me if I'm wrong, Kelly.
So my response to that is I have no idea, because I don't look at the protein much. If you're really needing high protein lupins, if you can get it, beats it down, you can work it out. But the most important thing is the energy, and protein is only important in a couple of situations. And at this time of year, protein is going to be even less of an issue with most of the feeds we're feeding, and most of them we'd be fine for protein. So protein is really important if you're trying to feed a lot of lambs and get lambs up and finished. If you don't have 14 to 15% protein in the ration, plus 13 or 11.5 to 12 ME, you won't get maximum growth rate. But so long as you're hitting the 10 to 12% protein for lambing ewes, you're going to be on the money. And the thing that they're not going to do any better on a higher protein feed other than lupins. And the reason they do so well on lupins is not because it's so high in protein, but it's high in bypass protein, which is a free gift to sheep because they don't have to break it down to nitrogen and build it back up into the protein. They get some of it going directly into their small intestine, and that is highly efficient. But again, I mean, lupins is our gift to sheep. If you can get hold of lupins, you can't beat them, but there is a cost to that. And no, none of you grain growers want to grow lupins these days, buggy. So Stewie's shaking his head. Can't get anyone to grow enough lupins for me. So
Was there any other questions on the pre-questions there, Jess?
There was. So there was two. Now, the really quick one right at the beginning was, and I think we've covered it already, is just do lambing ewes require hay as a supplement as well as grain? And please correct me if I'm wrong. What I have learnt so far is yes, lambing ewes require fibre to enhance their lactation. So I think I'm on a win there.
Yeah.
And the other question that we did have pre-filled was actually Stuart. So about some photosensitivity stuff. So Stuart, do you want to ask, are you comfortable asking that question or?
Yeah, I'm just having a bit of trouble. Let me see.
Yeah, we can hear you, Stu. I could before.
I think you've put your music. Yeah, we go.
I was having a few tech issues here. Yes, actually, the stuff about just before I ask the question, the talk about how important roughage is and fibre. I'd overlooked that because I'm still feeding wheat and we've just started lambing, so I'm sort of way off mark at the moment and short feed like everyone else, but have destocked with a lot of lambs that we would have normally carried through. So sort of half right, half wrong. My question was, I got some trade lambs in today, which was a very bad idea buying trade lambs, as it turns out, but I did think it was going to rain. And there's about 15 to 20% of them look to have like a photosensitization as if they've been on a brassica, which they haven't been. They've been on very short, loosened paddock, and blown up ears, blown up face, a bit of like a goiter possibly under the chin. It looks like it could be even a barber's pole. Is that a possibility this time of the year, barber's pole, or any other ideas?
Yeah, absolutely, Stu. If you read the textbooks, we can't get barber's pole at this time of year. In the good management here at Talubi, I had egg counts 8 days ago of 4,000 eggs per gram, and bottle jaw in wethers that we'd had down the back and hadn't been feeding. So you can definitely get barber's pole. You won't get iodine deficiency this year. I'll be pretty confident on that. Iodine deficiency occurs in wet years, and when sheep are eating soil, they get a lot of iodine with them. So it will be probably barber's pole. The other thing but you're on the wrong side of the highway, so you're safe. But the other thing this year that should be really bad is liver fluke, because sheep will have been chasing any green swampy areas where the fluke would have been hiding. So places east of me that normally get liver fluke will be having troubles if they're not on top of it in this coming spring. As before, normally at this time of year, those springs are too wet and sheep don't like going into the water, but they're really flogging out every bit of green feed. In terms of the photosensitization, I mean, it's just one of those things that in years when sheep are trying to eat everything, it's amazing how many plants do have the ability to cause some form of photosensitization. And there's absolutely nothing you can do with those sheep other than you did well today because you gave them a shady, keep that cloud cover over and hopefully they'll see it out.
Yeah, well, I've changed.
Your comment in the previous... Sorry, you say, Stu?
Oh, sorry. I was just saying I've actually swapped paddocks and put them back onto grazing wheat at this point, with the assumption that it is something that they've actually eaten more so than a barber's pole hit. But they're not dying or anything, so that's one thing. And it's only just sort of seems to have happened. So yeah, I'd have to think that just the shortness of the feed in these loosened paddocks, and they're eating something that they shouldn't, or it's doing something that you normally wouldn't pick up. Anyway, you go.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the risk is that there's two sorts of photosensitization. The risk is that it's secondary photosensitization. They've actually got liver damage, which means that they're not going to do as well. But given that they're trade lambs, you just need to get them off against you.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks, Bruce.
I just want to comment. Jess got it exactly right there. what I was saying about the feeding lambing ewes is you need fibre, and hay can be very useful. If you're feeding some high quality feed like wheat, then you just need to get a bit of hay in. Just watch that you don't get too much hay in and their energy levels drop so far that they're not keeping their weight up. Everyone thinks hay's really good. And my experience is, I'm not a good haymaker, and you guys probably all make much better hay, but I've seen a lot of tests of hay, and even well-made hay, most people refer to hay as good based on its protein, not on its energy. And generally the energy can't be above 9 and is usually running at 7 or 8, which is great for dry sheep, but is no good, definitely no good for lambing ewes. It is fine for lactating ewes so long as it's only about 25 or less than 25% of the diet. So don't let that hay get above that, but 25% of the diet plus wheat would be a good option for lambing ewes, so long as that hay is palatable.
Yeah. Okay.
Very good. Any other questions?
I just go back.
Bruce.
Oh, yep.
Do you vaccinate for CampiVax or recommend it? And if you do, what is your protocol like?
I think I recommend it, which means I should, Jed. You do as I say and not as I do. So never ask me what I do, Jed. So I did a trial. There's a lot of talk that by giving CampiVax, what you should do with CampiVax is you should give 2 doses before you put the rams out. And if you forget to do that, 1 dose as you put the rams out to the ewe maiden first year joining, and 1 dose when you bring the rams in. So 2 doses 4 to 6 weeks apart is what you should be doing for CampiVax. There was there's some work floating around that suggests that even where you don't see problems, you get a 10% increasing lambing percentage. We did a trial in the Holbrook district on 6 farms that had not seen any Campylobacter to their knowledge on their farms. So we excluded 1 farm where there'd been an outbreak. We only looked at the ewe lambs, or the ewe maidens on each farm, which are the biggest risk group. And on 5 of those 6 farms, we got no response to vaccination. And on 1 farm, we got 15% response to vaccination. So all I can tell you is it's possible you get a response, and my information is you got a 1 in 6 chance of getting a response. So that sort of took the wind out of the sails a little bit. Depends what you think your lambs are worth and what the risk is. But at this point, there is nothing you can do about Campylobacter other than avoid feeding in the same spot day in and day out to ewes coming up to lambing. That skirt round the question sufficiently, Jed?
Yeah. No, we have seen it on our place previously when we were feeding in a drought line at that point. But yeah, and now we do vaccinate the maidens twice, and I'm just wondering. But you know, if you read the label, it says you should be vaccinating everything every year. But
yeah, it's a great everything that's written on the label is correct. Except that the companies conveniently forget that the sheep are in a real world where they're being exposed to pathogens regularly anyway. And what we know about Campylobacter is there's probably a low-level exposure most years. The ones that don't get it are the lambing ewes because they haven't been in a paddock with lambing ewes other than when they were born. And so they're the at risk. So my take on it all from everything I've seen is you vaccinate twice and only your lambs, and don't worry about boosters to the rest of the sheep. Now, if you think you're experiencing problems in your older sheep with abortions, which is quite unusual, then it's worthwhile getting it investigated. If you think it's Campylobacter and you've done the 2 vaccinations, then that would say on that particular property an additional vaccine is worthwhile. But I can tell you that in most instances that additional vaccine won't be giving you any productivity gains. But I would always think that if you're concerned about it, vaccinating the first group lambing, and I keep on saying that because some people make lambs and some people make 1.5-year-olds. So whichever group you're first lambing down, 2 shots of Campylobacter vaccines, probably very good insurance policy.
But at joining, not now. That's right.
Not now, at joining.
Yeah.
At joining, either 2 shots before joining or 1 before and 1 after.
Gus, you were going to ask a question before. Have you still got it?
Yeah. Bruce, a question around optimal weaning time, given sort of the break we've had and sort of trying to look after the ewe and get the best result for the lamb. I've heard that sort of earlier weaning is better in these sort of scenarios, or is that more dependent on if your spring is going with you?
So, great question, Gus. And just to put it into context, because I know a little bit of background here, there's an enormous difference between composite ewes, first cross ewes, and merino ewes. So there isn't an answer to this that can't be that is general. It's got to be very specific. And what we've all got to do is start to pay attention to the milkability of the ewes. And the easiest way to see whether a ewe, how much a ewe is milking, is the distance a lamb is from the ewe. So if you're looking at your ewes, not when you're going out with a feed cart, but just generally going past them, you will see that lambs generally at the age up to about 4 to 6 weeks, you can tell whether a ewe's had a single or a twin pretty easily, because you can see 2 lambs not far from each mother, or 1 lamb from the mother. But you have a look in a normal season at 14 weeks of age, and the ewes are spread pretty well right across the paddock. And the reason is, at that stage, the lamb's getting 95% of its nutrition from the mother. And as Phil Lumsden told us, the lambs were just competing with the ewes, and that's what happens. So I can't give you an exact date, but looking at how much milk the ewes got might give you a bit of an indication. But I actually think looking at the lambs and the distance the lambs are from the mothers, and you watch over the next 3 weeks, that distance is going to grow as those lambs have to start seeking more and more feed, less and less milk. That will be your best indicator. And most of us will probably see the lambs starting to just almost stop in their growth rates, I'm predicting this year, as they're knocking off from milk. But just remember, you cannot get a better source of nutrition than milk. So as soon as you wean those lambs, you're going to have to provide for them, and the earlier you wean them, a higher quality feed than you're mostly going to have, or that the ewes needed. So it's not a bad policy keeping the ewes going if you can, but at some point it is not worthwhile trying to feed the ewes to make them produce a little bit of milk, because they will still eat a lot to try and do that. So I've got it very clearly in my mind, and I haven't imparted it to you all as clearly as that, I'm sorry, but it's a matter of, in our normal season, we all know that there's no point in a lamb being on a ewe after about 4 months, because she's just not getting any. But for merino ewes, that's 3 months. For a decent crossbred ewe and some of the composite ewes, it's probably 4.5 months, around that. The issue is that you can start weaning lambs, and if provided you've got good feed for them, and if that's in 6 weeks' time and we've started to get a bit of growth, it will be high quality feed, so that won't be too much of a problem. But you can wean lambs at 8 weeks of age, but if you've joined for 5 weeks, you're lambing over 6. So then you've got a spread of 8 weeks down to 2 weeks. You're not going to be weaning lambs at 2 weeks. I remember, I shouldn't say names, but he's well and truly dead, and we all know him. I remember Ken Ross weaned lambs at 4 weeks of age once in a particular drought, and then killed them all. And that deliberately. And I mean, those sort of policies we probably don't institute now. But it is really a matter of maybe if you've got a bit of a spread lambing, it might be a year where you might have 2 goes at weaning. Bring in and get the 60% off that are in the first 3 weeks at about 11 weeks or 12 weeks of age, if the ewes aren't milking well. Now, the mistake I've made, and I don't think I can do it, I don't know how to do this, I haven't got a graph of milk production. But milk production goes, it's one of these curves that goes up and then comes down. It's your typical curve that you see, and it goes up and reaches its maximum at about 4 to 6 weeks and then starts to tail off. And the distance that it tails off depends how much nutrition, but importantly, the peak that it gets to at 4 to 6 weeks is determined by the nutrition in the last 2 weeks of pregnancy and the first 4 weeks of lactation. So if we're underfeeding, which we might well be, some of our ewes that are milking, they're not going to hit peak lactation. Their lactation peak is going to be lower and it's going to drop off faster. So this is why I'm hammering the weaning time, because if our milk production is not as good, we're probably going to drop 3 weeks worth of milk production off our usable milk production in a season like this season. They're still going to milk, but they're not going to be milking at 11 or 12 weeks of age like they normally milk. So that's what I think you need to be looking at. But I'm not going to give a date to anyone, because what applies in your sheep with your nutrition and the way you've done will be slightly will be quite different to what other people ought to be doing. And I don't want everyone to go away and say, Bruce said we have to all wean our lambs on this particular date post-lambing, because that's not what I'd be saying. But it's this principle of really, I mean, mostly we're assessing condition of ewes coming up to joining. This year, we're assessing milking ability of ewes to work out when we should wean lambs, remembering that the earlier we wean lambs, the better the feed we've got to give to the lambs, which equals more cost or having that feed available, which Alison's made sure it grows for us. So they're our sort of provisos. It's not as simple as just saying wean early, that'll help the ewes. It will help the ewes, it just won't help the lambs. So it's that dilemma we're going to have to face.
Now I'm thinking about what paddock I'm going to put aside for weaning. Jess has asked a good question. Is there a minimum weaning weight we should aim for successful weaning? So we were saying merinos are 3 months, the others are 4, but is there a minimum weight?
Great question. Don't actually know the answer to that. I'm going to say 14 to 15 kilos is probably your minimum weight you're looking at. But every kilo you can get on that lamb, I mean, we're probably looking at somewhere around 10 kilos of 50% survival, and about 14, you're probably looking at about 80% survival. So we've got to be getting up to there. But again, that's a little bit breed dependent. And I'm really talking merinos there. I mean, the others are going to survive. They're just not going to thrive. But merinos will be the ones that will pack it in. Now, I've got plenty of merinos coming along.
Yeah, so have I. Any other questions?
But weight of lamb is not a determinant of weaning. Time is not a determinant of weaning. Milking of the ewe and whether that lamb is no longer receiving most of its nutrition from the ewe, i.e. it's quite a distance mostly from its mother, is the signal to be weaning. That's my message. I mean, I don't want people weighing their lambs and saying, oh, they've hit 14 kilos, I should be weaning them. And it turns out the ewes are milking really well. That would be a waste. Get them up to 20 kilos if the ewes are milking well. But if the ewes aren't milking well, try and get them somewhere in that 10 to 12 kilos, hopefully 14 kilos, and then you can think about weaning. It takes a minimum of 3 to 4 weeks to develop the rumen from scratch. You've got to get at least 2 to 3 weeks. Heck, we should have Tom on this thing, Jed. Tom might be able to answer these questions. He did all the work on it. But somewhere around that sort of time weight, if you're looking for a time and weight, but please think about the ewe milking rather than anything else.
Just have a rolling question off from that as well then, Bruce. So if you are making that balance between, okay, I've decided I'm going to wean, what is a good base, like ration? Like what should you be feeding, lambs if you're going to wean them? What's your entry-level ration for them if you don't have that required high energy in the paddock as such?
this is where protein becomes important. 14% protein minimum, and hopefully 11 ME is your minimum ration to keep them going. Protein is really important in young growing animals. It's the only area where I'd get excited about protein. And you need a high quality protein. Milk is running up at your 16, 18, 20% protein, and you're already dropping them back. But if I'm thinking of Phil Lumsden, he's already got them going, but I'm thinking of the rest of us. If we've got short pasture, that quality will be quite high. If we keep the worms out of them, we actually might be lucky that the quality of that pasture might be quite right. But as Alison said, we need to start thinking about high quality pasture if we're weaning lambs early. Remembering that we get away with murder we're in good seasons because the lambs look after themselves, and then you got a few weeks after weaning and suddenly you think, oh, I should have been looking after these lambs better. You can still pick them up. This year we don't have that luxury. We're 3 weeks behind the 8 ball with milking, and we're right on the borderline once we wean them to needing to get the job right.
So there's not necessarily a preference between, say, if you put them onto a grain or you put them onto a lupin, or in terms of, like, say, attractiveness of the feed for them. It doesn't necessarily matter. Even if they're hungry.
It does not matter at all. But what does, I mean, I do have a preference, and you'll know my preference, and that is lupins. I mean, lucerne hay is a good mix in. That the thing is, lambs don't cope well with high starch, low fibre diets from the word go, because their rumen's not that developed. So, I mean, wheat would be about the last thing I'd be thinking of is weaning lambs onto wheat to begin with, but you can get them onto it once you've got them going. We ran an interesting trial here, which absolutely astounded me. It was in 1976. We locked up 400 lambs in a yard and that had never been fed before, and we offered them lupins ad lib, and we didn't lose one animal. And it was absolutely amazing. It was some early work that Ciro were doing on feeding lupins, and it really is a safe feed. Whereas if you did that with wheat, you'd have half the lambs would have been dead, and the other half would have been recovering from grain poisoning. So if you've got to get them onto something, that's good. Lucerne hay is good because, you know, they can eat as much as they can. They've got high protein, and if they've got some access to energy, you'll be all right. But you need some sort of grain in there. Oats has always been a lot better for getting lambs going. But what you've triggered there is, this is the strategy that everyone should be doing every year, but probably this year you don't need to do it, is imprint feeding your lambs. But I'm guessing our lambs are going to be the best imprint fed they've ever been. So I don't think we're going to have to train them on it. So if we're feeding right up until weaning, maybe, you know, it's going to be an easy transition into some of these things. But I'd still be sticking away from wheat and trit till they're at least 4 months of age, just to get away from that really. I don't know whether anyone's had any experience with it, but my experience with wheat and trit is just when you think it's going, something goes wrong. And that's because some animals get onto it, and then you think everyone's onto it. Then the one that was a bit of a shy feeder suddenly comes onto it and gets a gutful, and you lose a few. You just don't get that with oats and lupins.
Very good. Any final questions? Well, Bruce, we've managed to fill the hour. So
Phil Julian's got one there, Alison, I think.
Phil, you want to ask a question? Go for it.
G'day, Phil.
That's not me, is it?
Yep.
No, I'm good. I don't have a question.
Oh, no,
sorry, Phil Julian.
Phil Julian,
sorry.
You're just on mute again, sorry.
Try one more time, Phil. I can't hear you yet. I'd like to hear you. Yeah, now that should be good.
There we go.
Drenching at weaning time. I usually use a weaner guard. Should it be any different this year?
Well, I mean, the reason you use weaner guard is it's really easy to use, which is good, and I've done it too, Phil. But yeah, Phil, I can't answer this question. I'm going to get myself into trouble, whatever I say, but I'll try. Look, really the triple actives are better, and you can't get that. You're using a single active in Weaner Guard, and you're probably better on a triple active. But the only thing I can suggest is if you do use Weaner Guard, I would strongly recommend getting fecal samples 10 days after you've drenched the lambs to confirm that the drench has actually worked. My understanding is that most single actives are not going to be effective. I mean, Weaner Guard's got moxidectin into it. It's a good drug, but on its own, we've got so much resistance to it. I'd be doing the drench and the vaccine as two separate operations, which is what I do now, just to get a more effective drench.
So you reckon a triple acting and a 5-in-1?
Yeah, 6-in-1. Tri-Guard and 6-in-1 is what I use.
Okay.
And that's prompted another point. I presume everyone knows, but if you're using 6-in-1 or 5-in-1 and you want to put selenium in, there's enough selenium in the vaccine for an 11-kilogram lamb. So interestingly, vaccines is the only thing that we don't administer on body weight. We give a 1 ml dose to an 8-kilogram lamb, and we give a 1 ml dose to an 80-kilogram ewe or ram. It is not body weight dependent, but drenches and trace elements are body weight related. So you have to give 0.1 milligram a kilogram for selenium if you need selenium. So don't think at weaning time, unless you've got really light lambs, that if you need selenium, there's enough selenium in the vaccine. Most drenches, bar one, I think have selenium added into it. So it's not really an issue in this day and age. And interestingly, but nowhere near Holbrook, I have seen a spectacular case of selenium overdosing, unrelated to vaccine or drenching, but related to putting out a supplement to lambs as they were weaned. So you can, I don't think it's a problem for us, but you can actually overdo some of these things as well. So just watch what you're putting into them. Thanks, Phil. I don't think I've answered your question very well, but I'm sorry.
I think you have, Bruce. But I'll definitely do the worm tests.
Yeah, yeah. Look, the cheapest, easiest way to just check that your drench is working, if you've got a group of sheep that you know are wormy or you think are wormy, the ones you know are wormy, you've already got an egg count from, or they're dropping down the paddock. The ones you think are worming will be lambs at weaning, because most of them will be this year. Just take an egg count 10 days after you've drenched. If that's zero, there's only two reasons why it can be zero. Either you were wrong and they had no worms to begin with, which is highly unlikely this year, or your drench is working really well. If it's high 10 days after, you're at least forewarned not to keep using that drench and to think about something else. It costs $600 to $800 to do a proper drench trial on a farm. It costs $30 to test that. It's the best thing you can do is 10 days after drenching. Between 10 and 14, it cannot be after 14. It cannot be before day 7, but between day 7 and 14, so preferably day 10, get a fecal sample from 10 or 15 sheep, and it's zero. It gives you a lot of confidence that your drenching's working, you know what's going on.
And on that, I've got a stash of the CSU worm test kits in the Holbrook office. So if you want one, just come past or a couple, come past and grab them. I'm always up around Wagga, so I usually keep a bit of a supply there. So they're reply paid. Yeah, just drop by and grab them anytime.
Or I could take them to Keogh Laboratories.
Yeah.
Or you could take them to Keogh Laboratories.
Yeah. Rest assured that was not me trying to plug CSU thing. I send my own samples to CSU. So,
Yep. All right. We're out of time, Bruce.
Great.
If anyone has any further questions, let us know. And we'll try and get them, extract an answer out of Bruce, and we'll put that in the next edition of the newsletter. I hope tonight was helpful. we'd love to get some feedback from you if you want a change in how we do these, or whether you want another one. If there's another topic you want, just let us know. I'm hoping that it's helped answer a few questions, and you'll at least have a bit more food for thought and a bit more confidence on which direction to go this season. So that is good. All right. Well,
just need 2 inches of rain in a week of 20-degree weather.
Absolutely.
Here, Phil.
I've